Hello.
Hi.
Thank you very much. Wow. You walked from there?
I drove and then she made me walk.
You wouldn't want us to join the society because you're not. Well, you still feel free to go. You might. You might long distance. And if you want to meet in the shade there, so they're going to have our next year.
Lake Avenue Cemetery was established in the 1840s and is one of the largest burial grounds in Crystal Lake, Duncan Township. There's more than 1,200 graves here, and we're going to be visiting 6 different grave sites where prominent people of Crystal Lake are buried. And the first one that we're going to see is going to be Hannah Beardsley Wallace.
You need a water, you okay?
The ladies and gentlemen of these sites are reenacting in first person to give you a better feel of the time.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Beardsley Wallace. I have been told that we will not be studying math and reading today, but we will be studying history. Crystal Lake history, to be exact. Does anybody here know who the first settler was in Crystal Lake? No? Well, that was Beeman Crandall and his family. They settled here back in 1836. Now, we Beardsleys, we almost became the first settlers because we passed through this area the previous year. We were on our way from New York to Naperville. Oh, what a long trip that was. My brother Iva took one look at that water and said, my goodness, that water is clear as crystal. And don't you know, that's how Crystal Lake got its name. That's Iva, he always knew the right thing to say. Anyway, we did settle in Naperville for about a year, and we decided to join our friends the Crandalls up here in Crystal Lake because we'd heard so many wonderful things about this area. So, once again, we packed up that covered wagon and off we went. We did think we could make that final stretch of our journey from Elgin to Crystal Lake in one day. What do you think happened? We got caught in a blizzard. And if that wasn't bad enough, then it got all dark. So we thought the smart thing to do was just to camp out overnight. Oh, what a night that was. Being a woman, I got to sleep in the wagon with the other women. But where do you think the men had to sleep? Under the wagon. Those poor men. Oh, so what do you think we had to do the following morning? We had to dig them out. We had to dig ourselves out of the snow and then continue on our journey. Don't you know, we were amazed at how quickly we arrived at the Crandall property. It was right up here on Virginia Street, and we had camped out by the south shore of the lake. We almost made it after all, just like we hoped. Yep. No. After more people had settled in the area, I was very honored. I became Crystal Lake's first school teacher. Oh, what a wonderful time that was. I had a schoolhouse with a log cabin, 20 feet by 20 feet. I've heard that some of your bedrooms are bigger than that today. Oh, anyway, we took logs, split them in half, turned them up so the smooth side was on top, and attached them to the wall. And what do you think we used those for? Those were the desks. Seems so primitive to think about that now, but boy, we sure thought that was wonderful back then. To think about all the learning that took place in that one small room. It's just amazing. In 1840, I married my first husband, Franklin Wallace. Oh, what a wonderful man he was. And we were the first couple to be married here in Algonquin Township. Who do you think married us? Beeman Crandall. I did, however, marry Franklin's brother Columbus. He was also a wonderful man, and we shared a wonderful life together. He knew a famous stonemason from the area. His name was Mr. Andrew Jackson Simon. And he had Mr. Simon build me a beautiful, beautiful cobblestone house. I told Mr. Simon, I don't care what you do with that house as long as it does not have a fireplace. I had enough cooking over an open fire to last me a lifetime. Well, you know what we did? We got one of those newfangled Benjamin Franklin stoves. We were so lucky to have such modern conveniences. That was wonderful. Now I hear that my house is still standing. It's over there on Virginia Street where South Park used to be. I guess Alcoholics Anonymous took it over now.
Afforded the honor
Hard to
of
imagine a
being
business
named
being
Crystal
run
Lake
in my old
Aristocracy.
room. Well, at least somebody's there to take care of them since I
Pearson
can't.
family, and
Anyway,
the goal should be coming down the street
Mr.
any moment
Simon
now. To go
also
up
built
Stairs
2 other
Drive.
cobblestone homes in the area.
Crystal Lake has been
One
our
of them
home
was for
since
Mr. Pearson and his
1862.
family. It was right down the road from us. I guess the mayor technically to have it torn down. They have to make room for the local switch station. So sad. But the walk-up house is still around. It's over there by Veterans Acres. I don't know if any of you have seen that.
I lived there till
Beautiful craftsmanship.
when my family
Anyway, Columbus and I had 4 children while we lived in that house. Oh, what a wonderful memory. Anyway, I realize now just how fortunate we were to live in a time when we were such a big part of creating this wonderful community.
health department chairman.
Well, I guess that's all for today, but instead of quizzing you on today's material, I would like it very much if you shared the information with your friends and family. That way you can help keep Crystal Lake history alive forever.
So he was very, very
And I are working on her new wool dress for the winter. We're trying to finish it for the Harvest Social at church. That's the first congregational church up on Park Street. But it's very difficult in the fall, you know, as all the canning and preserving, I know you're all doing at home, takes up a lot of time. The weather has been very good this summer. We've had lots of rain and the crops have been excellent. My husband, Mr. Pearson, has had a very difficult time dividing his time between the farm and his store up on Virginia Street. That's the big 3-story brick building with all the shops, the post office, meeting rooms, and of course the dance hall. And we've just lost our hired hand. He's gone off to war with all the other Crystal Lake boys, and we dearly miss him. I wonder where my Lizzie is. I sent her up to the post office to check on the mail. I suppose Mr. Pearson has sent her off on an errand for the store. I kind of worry about her lately. She seems kind of down. I think all the girls in Crystal Lake are a little worried now that the boys are gone, that they're all going to become old maids. Oh, here she comes. We won't say anything. Lizzie, what have you been? Lizzie, you're so worn out. What have you been doing?
Well, Father had me run an errand for Mr. Simon. Now, with Mr. Simon's out the door, it's hard for her to get to the store. She doesn't have time. So whether we have a letter from Lawrence.
Oh, how wonderful. So good to hear from him. I remember when we went to pick him up, my sister's boy, and she had become very, very ill and couldn't take care of the little one anymore. You were only 2 years old. Father and I went out to New York to get Lawrence. He was a little boy of 4 and just so curious about everything. We took the steamboat from New York to Albany and then down the canal to Buffalo and then the steamboat here to Chicago. And he asked questions the whole entire way. He absolutely wore your father and I out trying to answer them all. He's such a inquisitive boy. You know, and he's been such a good companion for your father and helping with the farm. But your father and your uncle want his education to be foremost. Such a bright boy.
I wish I could have gone to all of the schools that Lawrence has, the Crystal Lake Academy, and then he went to the Batavia Institute. And now he's at the University of Michigan studying for a law degree.
Now, Lizzie, you know, a lady's place is in the home. And once you're a wife and a mother, you won't have time to think about such things.
Yes, but with all the boys off to the war, it doesn't seem like that's going to be happening soon. And I'm almost 19.
Now, God willing, this war will be over soon. The boys will be home and you'll be arrive soon enough.
Oh, Mother, the letter.
Oh, yes, let's see what Maurice has done. Dear Aunt Mary, Uncle James, and Lizzie. Let's see, he's been busy with his studies. He has founded a university battalion of young men preparing to enter the war. Oh, my poor, poor sister. He is very frustrated with his father for not allowing him to volunteer for the front. Thank heaven. But after the death of his older brother and severe wounding of his other brother, he understands his father's objections and will honor his request to finish school. I certainly hope this war ends before he finishes his studies. It would be wonderful to have a lawyer in the family, maybe even a judge someday.
Yes, and I certainly miss him so. We had such fun as children.
You are wonderful playing. This war has taken such a toll. I can't imagine my sister's distress at losing a son. And I worry so about our Crystal Lake boys. We've lost Orlando Nash. And Mrs. Gates is just distraught. They don't know where Sumner is. They think maybe he is a prisoner. All we can do is pray for him.
Yes, I'm so glad though that Father founded the Soldiers' Aid Society. It keeps us busy making all the things for the men. And with all the congregations working together, we have so much to send them.
Yes, with the scarves and the mittens and the extra shirts. And with your father getting corn and produce to send to them, I hope it all arrives before winter so it can help them. Oh, listen, what time is it getting to be? I think we need to start getting ready for dinner. Oh, yes. Would you mind going out to the garden for me, get me some tomatoes and cucumbers, and check the hen house for some more eggs?
Are we going to make sponge cake?
Oh, yes, your father's favorite. And I want you to wear that shawl this time. I don't want you getting chilled.
Yes.
Thank you, dear. I worry so about Lizzie. She just doesn't seem very strong lately. You have just seen a portion of Mary Pearson and Lizzie's life. I'm going to step out of character now to tell you the rest of the story. Unfortunately, Mr. and Mrs. Pearson were not to enjoy their wonderful Lizzie for very long. She died in the spring of 1862 of quick consumption, which would probably be diagnosed today as a tuberculosis. She was only 19 years old and was never to realize her dream of being a wife and mother. Mr. and Mrs. Pearson continued to be very active in the Crystal Lake area. Besides being very large landowners here in town, Mr. Pearson served as county treasurer, representative to the state legislature, and justice of the peace for many years. In 1872, the Pearsons decided to relocate to Clinton, Iowa. There, Mr. Pearson founded a dry goods house of Pearson and Rowley, and he served as mayor in 1876 and city treasurer in 1877. Mrs. Mary Pearson was taken over the Dark River, as they used to call it, in 1884. Her obituary says that she had been in good health and that she was taken by a sudden rheumatic attack of the heart. At that time, she and Mr. Pearson had been married for 52 years. Her body was put on a train and sent back here to Crystal Lake, and she is buried beside her sweet Lizzie. Mr. Clinton continued another 2 years in Clinton, or Mr. Pearson, I'm sorry, and at the age of 82, married Miss Ida Harridan. The marriage did not last long, passed away 2 months later, and is buried next to his bride in Springdale Cemetery in Clinton. The Pearsons have been honored here in Crystal Lake for their efforts in the beginning of Crystal Lake. Park Street, which originally ran along McCormick Park, and the First Congregational Church is now Pearson Street in their honor, and it remains so today. Thank you.
Thank you.
It seems to be some locals. They must have seen we were on the porch this fine afternoon and come on to pay us a call.
How nice of them. Welcome, everyone. Can I get you something? Some tea, perhaps?
Sure is good of all of you to come by. It was getting a little boring, to tell you the truth, just going over some of the books here from the store. Just did inventory this morning on the canned goods, and adding up the numbers can be a little tiresome. You know, it's really interesting. It makes me think again how this time of year, one of the strangest things is the fact how many canned peaches people buy this time of year. It's flabbergasting. Ever since Uncle ran the store, we've been selling out of canned peaches this time of year like nonstop, and I just can't for the life of me think about how or why. And maybe it's because peaches are just
These folks have better things to think about than canned peaches. Don't you, folks? My, how you're dressed. Oh, I'm sorry, folks. I don't mean to offend, but it's just, I'm always amazed by how fast times change. I see when I was a little girl and Walter, we have company. When I was a little girl and Walter was a little boy, Crystal Lake was just starting out. We knew Beeman Crandall, who was the first white man to come to this part of Illinois in the 1830s. You know, even the house that we were born in was partially a log cabin. Of course, I was not born in the log cabin part of the house, that is for sure. That is most certain. Mother had 8 children in that house, only 3 of whom made it to adulthood. Myself, my brother Walter, and a sister named Virginia who lives in Baltimore.
That's true. Life was very difficult back then. Mother died when she was 43. And Father didn't feel it was appropriate for us to grow up in a house all just with him, so he sent us in town to live with our Aunt Sarah and our Uncle James, Marlowe, and that's where we lived. Uncle James was a brilliant businessman. Now, he owned Pearson's Block. Do you all know where Pearson's Block was? No? Well, maybe you know it by its later name, Fitch's Block, named after yours truly, Mr. Walter Fitch. Anybody know where it is now? Right off the town square there. Well, in 24 they tore the building down anyway, and they put up one of those filling stations for those automobiles people went crazy for. I think it's still a filling station now. Someone told me the name of it. It's has to do with locomotion. It's Mobile Filling Station. That's exactly where it is, right off of Virginia Avenue there. And it was an exciting place. They had a dance hall, and there was a post office there, and stores, and Uncle's General Merchandise Store. It was a beautiful place. He brought me up in there, taught me everything it is that I know about business, made me the businessman that I am today. And I was a fast study, and I caught on pretty quick, and he made me a partner in the business. Marlowe and Fitch General Merchandise has a great ring to it, don't you think? A great name. Well, even if she doesn't think it's good, it's just as good as any other name, and it's even a little better if it's your own. And Uncle was he picked the most prime real estate in town, right off the main street, by the town square, by the First Congregational Church, with the railroad tracks for supplies right behind the building. You couldn't have picked a better spot. He was just so smart, so amazing.
So you have to excuse my brother. He gets quite excitable when he talks about his business. And don't forget that after Uncle James Marlowe passed on, you took very good care of that store. You ran it almost better than he did.
Well, thank you very much, sis. Those kind words are appreciated.
Well, we must give credit where credit is due. It's only right. And you also have a lot of honor. You felt that it was your duty to be buried with parents instead of Uncle James?
Yeah, I felt it was my duty to be buried here with Mother and Father next to them, because after all, they are the ones that brought us into this world. Laura is buried over where there's the purple flowers in the pot over there. That's next to Aunt Sarah and Uncle James. She's buried over there.
Now, folks, did you know that Walter was part of the Army around the Civil War? He was a volunteer, and he was nearly in battle, too.
That's true. I was 13 when the war broke out, and just like every other young man, I wanted to go out and do my part for the Union cause, no doubt, the Union cause. And they wouldn't have me. I was too young, and it wasn't until February of 1865 that they would take me 2 months before my 18th birthday. I joined the 153rd Illinois Infantry, and we went down to Nashville and guarded the railroads there, and never really saw any battles or anything. The war was over pretty much after we joined, and we were discharged in September, but sometimes I do wish I had been born a little earlier, so I could have been in battle, maybe, could have done more for the Union cause and helped out, just like all the other brave young men.
Walter, you were a boy then. A lot of the men that were fighting in the war were boys, too. I'm kind of glad you were too young to fight, because then, you might not have come back to me, and who would have kept me company all these years?
That's true, sis, but it doesn't stop me from thinking, what if?
What if is a question that should never enter your mind. What if this? What if that? How would my life be different if I did this instead of that? I never think that way. Take me, for instance. I never, I'm very happy to be the caretaker of family. I never think, what if I got married, had a family of my own? I never think that way. Then I wouldn't have been able to take care of grandfather and Aunt Sarah and Uncle James, and even you. Don't forget I took care of you, too.
That's true, but now I wasn't much trouble now, was I? Up until the last few days, I was out in the garden every morning, planting and weeding and everything else, and it was a beautiful garden.
Well, I know that, and, I took care of you fine, but it's really hard to watch your whole family get sick, grow old, pass on. You know, even for the last 10 years, I was all alone. Sure, I had a lot of friends, but I was the last one in my family. I didn't have any family. But in a way, I kind of wish that I would have been able to live a couple years longer, because when I passed on, Crystal Lake was planning its centennial. And oh, was it wonderful. Everybody was coming up to me, asking me how Crystal Lake was when it had just started. I always had my wits about me. This one man, you should have seen him. He was so surprised to find out that I knew Beeman Crandall. He just couldn't believe it. I'm sure the centennial went fine, didn't it? Wonderful. You guys are probably closer to your bicentennial than your centennial by now, aren't you? Right. We probably wouldn't even recognize Crystal Lake the way it is now.
No, we probably wouldn't, Laura. Times do change and things do change, but I always like to think there's a part of them that stays the same anyway. I wonder what the general stores are like. I bet you there's things in there that me and Uncle, we just would have never even dreamed of, ways of putting things on shelves and products, but, well, we've been here a long time, and I'm getting a little tired here, and I have to finish up these books before the end of the day, and Laura here is going to fall asleep on her needle here, and then we'll have a real problem. So if there's anything else that Laura can get you, like if anybody has any questions for us. Well, I thank you all for stopping in and paying us a call, and do come back anytime. Anytime.
Did Walter Pitts get married?
No, he did not. No. I never got married. Always too involved in the business. I knew everybody. I knew everybody. Everybody had credit with me, and that's an important thing. They were all very friendly with me. That's true.
Well, Mr. Crow, here we are sitting in this very, very hot day, waiting for the Doles to come and pick us up in a carriage.
Sarah Crow, thank you. Yes, we are waiting for the Doles to arrive. We are part of Crystal Lake aristocracy, according to the Noonday Herald. My name is James Crow. This is my wife, Sarah. And we, along with the Doles, the Gateses, and the Pearsons, are part of what was called Crystal Lake aristocracy from the 1850s all the way up until the 1890s. I died in 1893. So our daughter, Louise, was friends with Harriet Dole, and so our family and the Dole family that lived in the Dole mansion, we became very close friends as well.
Yes, and I remember back when I was just a girl. I was born in Cooperstown, New York, and I came with my family here to Chicago in 1839. And my family was rather prominent in Chicago. My father, Orson Smith, and my mother, Mary Smith, got into the political groups in the city. My father was not only a tax collector for Chicago, but he was also head of the health department. And he also, after his political career, worked for a railroad and started the first mail run. So he worked with the railroad until the end of his life. I had a brother, Orson, who was president of the Mercantile Trust and Savings in Chicago. And your family, though, was very prominent too, Mr. Crow.
We were Republicans, though, Sarah, and your family were Democrats.
Oh, yes.
But when we came to Crystal Lake, of course, you became a Republican too,
I
and
did.
we became a Republican family. I was originally from Baltimore, Maryland, and my family had a plantation in Baltimore where I was born in 1818. My father had fought in the War of 1812, and my mother's father had fought in the Revolutionary War. My parents died in the 1830s, and so I moved in with my mother's parents in Newburgh, New York, and at the age of 19 I left New York and went to Natchez, Mississippi, where I began a career as a shipping merchant and made my fortune on the river with the river traffic. I came to Chicago in 1847. I met Sarah. We were married in Chicago and then arrived in Crystal Lake in 1856. Our first land that we bought here in 1856, we bought from Beeman and Polly Crandall, who were the original original settlers of Crystal Lake. And our original house was called the Crow House, which is at the end of Leonard Parkway in Crystal Lake and still stands today. We had 51 acres there, and then we built our mansion. We built the Crow Mansion, which also still stands today and is at the corner of Leonard Parkway and Woodland Drive and has been made into apartment buildings today, but that's where we raised our family.
Yes, I dearly love the mansion, and I dearly love Crystal Lake. We lived in Chicago, and Chicago was very exciting at that time period, but Chicago was dirty and smelly. And we come out to Crystal Lake, and we look at a beautiful lake, like a crystal, and the air was fresh and much greenery, and I was so pleased to come here. We built our mansion here, and we had our family came with us, and we were also very, very active in the church, in the Congregational Church here in Crystal Lake. In fact, our name, Crow, is on one of their stained glass windows. And you were very active, Mr. Crow. Tell them about that.
Well, I started the first private girls' school in Crystal Lake at the Congregational Church. It actually met in the chapel of the Congregational Church, and my two daughters, Fanny and Louise, attended that school. And then I was one of the people who started the Union School in Crystal Lake, which joined the two towns of Crystal Lake and Nunde, and which was torn down, but Hussman Elementary School still stands there at the corner of Paddock and Franklin and Woodstock and McHenry Avenue in Crystal Lake, still stands there today. So I was on the school board then once that school was built. But you know, the reason I wanted to come to Crystal Lake was because of farming. You know, with the plantation and everything, Sarah, I was a farmer at heart.
Yes, you were. Yes, you did much work with farming. You bought more land, and you were not only township supervisor, but you were head of the McHenry County Fair for many years. You did many agricultural experiments. But my favorite was when you put together the corn exhibit for the Century of Progress in Chicago, which opened people's eyes to the wonderful land here in McHenry County. And then tell them about your crowning achievement.
I grew bananas in Crystal Lake.
Yes. Actually,
Only once, though.
You grew bananas, and I don't think anyone has done it since.
No, I don't.
No. But we've had a wonderful life here in Crystal Lake. Our family is here with us. Here is your grave, and here is my grave. When, unfortunately, I died after you. I died in 1913 in Evanston, Illinois. But I came back to be with you. And here's Fanny, and that's Terry, who was our dear daughter who lived to be 7 years, 7 months old and died of diphtheria. And then we had another son, William, and oh yes, our son over there. Tell him about that.
Our son Louis, who moved to Evanston, is buried in the cemetery here in Crystal Lake, and he's buried over in that corner with his wife. Well, Sarah, I think the Doles are here.
Oh, yes, I see them.
Okay.
Let's go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I did.
Shady.
I'm Sylvia Gates. I was born Sylvia Day to Jabez and Sarah Day in Webster, Massachusetts on August 11th in 1811. I was one of 12 children, but I had a very good education, and I graduated with honors from an academy in eastern Massachusetts. My ancestors fought in the War of 1776, and my grandfather had a commission under George Washington. In 1844, I married Simon Gates in Webster, Massachusetts. Now, Simon had been married twice before, but both of his wives died, and each had bore him a daughter. Now, Simon was very educated, too, and But in 1838, he came out here to Illinois, all the way on horseback. And he liked it so well that he came back in 1839 and he invested in some land while he was here. In 1840, he was elected to the state legislature of Massachusetts. And he had this noble resolve to do right and this extensive knowledge of the principles of free government. We had our first son in 1845. And in 1852, we moved here to Illinois. On the way, our second son, William, was born in Ashland, Ohio. We settled on the land that Simon had purchased, south of town. You probably know it today as the Lake in the Hills Airport area. Our daughter, our only daughter, was born in 1858. In 1862, Simon bought the former Academy property. Now this was 6.5 acres on McHenry Avenue. Today, you probably know it as St. Mary's Episcopal Church. Now Sumner, our first son, was much like his father. His likes and his dislikes were extreme, but those who knew him said that he had a heart as big as time and a generosity as broad as eternity. He joined the 8th Illinois Cavalry and he fought in the Civil War. Now, he was taken prisoner, and while he was in prison, he got very ill. But he did make it back here, and he married Grace Bentley, and they had 2 children. But he died at a very early age. He was only 40 years old, and he's buried over here in the family plot. And this was because of the illnesses that he had picked up while he was in prison. William Day, our second son, we called him Willie. He graduated from both Wheaton College and the Chicago School of Law. And he was known as a very genial and courteous attorney in Chicago. He married Ida Babcock, and they had 6 children. Simon passed away in 1876 at the age of 77. He had very good business judgment, and in his lifetime, he had accumulated the largest land estate ever in McHenry County. And he's had 6 years of being a deacon in his church. And many said that they owed their success to the assistance of Simon and his encouraging words. When he died, he left us an estate of $526,000. In 1881, Willie took his inheritance and he bought the Spring Valley Tile Works factory, which was north of town on a former mill site on 31. Now they made drain tiles and they made brick from the local clay. It did burn down though in 1887, but he built it up bigger and better than ever. And soon they were manufacturing architectural ceramic terracotta. I don't know if any of you know Louis Sullivan, but he was an architect in Chicago. And he came out here and he worked at the factory for a while, along with Christian Schneider, a molder. And they designed some of the finest architectural terracotta ever made. And they shipped it by loadsful, carloadsful, all over the nation. They also made Tico pottery, which some of you have probably heard of. It's a very collectible item now, but then you could get it for pennies for it. This terracotta that they designed is on many buildings in downtown Chicago, including the Wrigley Building. And it's also on many buildings downtown here in Crystal Lake. Now, Simon, he was sort of a designing and calculating guy. And the family was not always very happy with the way he conducted his business. He made lots of money, he lost lots of money. Some of it was his and some of it was others. And then the family got very upset when he divorced Ida. Mary Catherine, our daughter, married G.W. Oakley, and they lived up in Madison, Wisconsin, where he was connected with the State Journal. That was the largest newspaper in the state of Wisconsin at that time. They had one daughter, Mary, and she only lived to be around 5 months, and she's buried here with us in the family plot too. Now, I've had a very good and a very long life. I lived to be 80 years old, dying in 1892, and now I'm buried here with Simon in the family plot too. And
Our traveling dress. The sleeves are really not part of the dress. The ladies didn't launder their dresses that often. They would spot clean them. I don't wash this strap up. The sleeves are detachable, and they tie up at the top. They're gathered and tied in a drawstring, and the collars are also detachable. So they would launder these and their undergarments more often than they would be for their dresses. On the bottom of my dress, I have this black trim, but it's not to make my dress look pretty. It's really to, it's a hem guard. And when I walk and my dress drags, I don't rough my fabric on my dress, and I can rip that off. When that gets a little raggedy, I can rip that off and put a new piece on. Underneath, I also have this piece here, this black piece here. And that's for when my feet are dirty. And when I walk, I don't get my dress dirty. And that also can be taken off and re-put back on. It does happen that the bottom of the dresses do get to be not nice looking anymore. So what the ladies used to do, they used to take the skirt part off the bodice, and they would turn it upside down, and they'd regather it, because there's probably about a 3.5, 4-inch leeway in the fabric. And they would take it all apart, and they just reverse it and gather the bottom and put it up under your sleeves. They didn't have a lot of money, so they were very clever. During the Civil War, there was very little bit of fabric, fancy stuff for the ladies, especially the ladies in the South, who are used to having the very fine silks and taffetas. And before the Civil War, they would get tired of their dresses, their wonderful, expensive dresses, and they would give them away. And during the Civil War, they were very sorry they did that, because they were running out of clothes at that time. I am very layered. I have stockings and boots on. I have drawers. I have a chemise that comes down here with sleeves. I have a corset on. I have a hoop on. I have my dress on and my sleeves. And my hat. It's making me very hot.
I should say so. Many layers.
I think they're about ready for us.
Okay.
Was there any questions that maybe you have?
Could you do me a favor? Could you just move over just a bit here? I just need to finish something up. I don't know what's going on today, but there's more people getting in my way. And I've got to finish this survey, but I can mark that now. There. My name is John Bree. If you could come closer, don't lean on the things, but you can come as close as you want until I get afraid, and I'll let you know. But as you could probably tell, I'm a surveyor. And I've been working in the hot sun all afternoon, and I probably could rest a spell. You wouldn't mind a visit for a while, would you? That'd be okay. When I was growing up back in western New York State, it was the early 1800s. In fact, I was born in 1811. Now, do you know your presidents? Who was president in 1811? James Madison.
a friend of Thomas Jefferson. I heard he was in town the other day. And Madison was the 4th president. I'm going to tell you how old I am. In fact, what was going on? There was a fellow, you ever hear Napoleon? He was causing a ruckus in Europe about that time. Of course, there was a man named Beethoven who was composing all kinds of beautiful music around that time. But anyway, I grew up on a farm. My parents were farmers. We worked hard. I didn't have much time for any formal schooling. That was until I got to the age 19. And I was able to get to another town and go to an academy. Now, academy is what you call school. You go to school, we went to an academy. And there, my teachers immediately found out that I was a natural at numbers. So arithmetic was my favorite subject. And the study of arithmetic led us to the study of surveying. There's a lot of arithmetic in that, in numbers. So before I know it, after 9 months of study, I finished the course of study, graduated, and found my instrument, which is this one right here. And I decided to head out west and seek my fame and fortune as a surveyor. So that's what I did. Headed out west, I came to a place called Fort Dearborn. I don't think that's around, well, I think you call it Chicago. Now, is that a rather large city? Never heard of it. Some people I hear would like to forget it. Well, you would have liked it back in 1831 when I went through there. I was 20 years old. There was a fort. Guess how many houses? 4. Only 4 houses. In fact, one of the houses was owned by a man named Dole, whose brother built a big house just down the block there. So I stayed just a short time before Dearborn because I had an appointment out west with a fellow. In fact, my appointment was in a city called Galena. Now that was a city. 1,500 miners, all trying to get the lead out. Oh yeah. And there I met a U.S. Deputy Surveyor, his name is John Mullen, and I joined his surveying team. And that's where I started my career. In fact, just to let you know, Abraham Lincoln was a surveyor, but he didn't start his career until 2 years after me. So that's the only instance in my life that I outranked old Abraham Lincoln. Well, we set out on that team to do the township lines in Wisconsin, southern Wisconsin. And back then, suddenly, a war broke out. You ever hear of the Black Hawk War? 1832. Chief Black Hawk and his Indians had been kicked out of their land east of the Mississippi. Well, they didn't want to go. So they stayed and fought for their land, which honestly, I couldn't blame them. Well, we happened to get caught up in that war. We were laying some lines up, there's a town called Madison. We were like 35 miles southwest of Madison when all of a sudden this fella comes running, waving his hands, telling us to stop and go back. Well, he was an Indian interpreter sent by a land government agent. And they had found out that we were headed right into an ambush that Chief Black Hawk had set just for us. They had been watching us. Well, needless to say, we hightailed back to Galena. Laid low for a while with those 1,500 miners. And a little bit later, I went across the big river. You know the big river? Mississippi? And I laid out a town called Dubuque. And I found out that I was the first surveyor ever to survey anything west of the Mississippi River using this very instrument. So that was quite an honor. A year later, 1833, there I am, standing on the shores of the most beautiful lake I'd ever seen in my life. Now that lake was a town called Fontana today. That's where I was. My instructions were to plat and survey lakes, rivers, ponds, and streams, and retain and preserve the Indian names. I have that memorized. So I had to find the locals. There was a tribe of Winnebagoes just down the shore. So we went and we parlayed with them. That's what we call talking, and the French taught us that. And I found the chief. His name was Bigfoot. So I asked him, what do you call this beautiful lake? You know what he said? Puffs out his chest. Bigfoot. Well, I didn't much like that name. Bigfoot. Nobody much likes a Bigfoot anyway. So I decided to change the name right then and there in my surveying record book. I wrote down Geneva. Now, Geneva was a town near where I was raised in New York. And near Geneva was a lake called Seneca. And this beautiful lake in these woods of Wisconsin reminded me of that area. So I put down Geneva. Sent in my records. By the way, a Frenchman named Junot, he founded a city, I don't know if you ever heard of Milwaukee. He was a friend of mine. And Junot told me that I was the first white man ever to set eyes on that lake. Well, it wasn't too long after I sent in my reports, I was called into my supervisor. Cincinnati, I had to go all the way there. He said, Brink, your reports are fine. I have a question about one thing. I knew what he was going to ask me. He says, Geneva, is that an Indian name? No, sir. What'd they call it?
Where I began to work on the river and ended up staying there and making my fortune
He
there.
said,
Leaving Natchez and coming to Chicago.
did you have the right to change that name?
Where we met.
Why'd you do it?
We were married in 18.
I looked him straight in the eye. And I said, that's too beautiful a lake for such an ugly name. And he said, well, why'd you call it Geneva? And I said, well, from Geneva, New York. I was raised there. He stops, he says, Geneva, New York? I was raised nearby. A smile came to his face. He said, you know what, we'll let it go this time. And it goes on the record as Geneva Lake, and that's how Geneva Lake got its name. Don't call it Lake Geneva. That's the town. Geneva Lake is what I named. Well, I did a lot more surveying other than land. 1840, I found a beautiful woman. Did some surveying there, too. And I must say, I fell in love with that type of survey. Her name was Catherine. We were married 1840. 1841, we found ourselves here in the fair city in Crystal Lake. And there we raised our two daughters, Lottie and Faye. Lottie got married, lived in Dundee. Faye never married. She stayed with Kate now her whole life. Well, as soon as I got here, I commenced to surveying. There was a fellow named Asa Bradley, who was a Cook County surveyor. He was helping some guy named Beeman Crandall and a guy named Walkup and Beardsley, and they were putting together a nice plat. And so I kind of helped them put the finishing touches on that. Eventually, I became McHenry County surveyor. Held that post almost 40 years. Besides that, I was county assessor, justice of the peace. I even was the county sheriff at one time. 1874, when the village of Crystal Lake decided we want to elect some trustees, I was amongst the first elected trustees of this fair village. Oh, I did some plat survey over here, 1857. I've seen here that's published in a lot of different places. In 1868, I did the original plat of Nunde. Well, that's your, something called Nunda, it's Nunde. And that's your downtown area. But you know, time went fast back then. You know, back in those times, you know what the speed of time was back then? 60 minutes per hour. Is it the same? Well, is it fast? Well, it seemed fast because before I knew it, Kate and I were married for 60 years. And just shortly before her 61st anniversary, she took us. Passed away in 1901. She's buried right here with me. Me, I lived down to the ripe old age of 93. And even in my 80s, you would find me in this very instrument, tromping around the village, surveying lots and farms and such like. And I hear that someone told me that if you go downtown today, you find a street with my name on it. And someone said, well, it's only 2 blocks. I said, those are the 2 finest blocks in this fair city. So next time you go by Brink Street, Stop and think of old Uncle John. That's what they called me. They said I was a good storyteller. I don't know. And think of these other folks that you met.
But you actually did it.
There's a lot of streets in this fair city named after dead people. I guess it's a tradition. But remember this too, that history is the one constant. You know, America's rolled by like an army of steamrollers. It's been like a blackboard that's been erased, rebuilt, and erased again. But history is marked down. This cemetery and these people, huge mass, they're part of your life. You know, the memories are so thick here this afternoon, you have to brush them away from your face. It reminds us all of what was good in the past and can be good today. Yeah. You never let your history become a mystery. I'd like to talk some more, but I've got work to do. I'm dying to finish up this project. But we thank you so much for coming. You have a fine day. Thank you.